When I was a younger man, I spent a few weeks on a small fishing vessel off the coast of Maine. The captain was an old sailor named Thomas, though everyone simply called him the skipper. He was a quiet man, broad-shouldered, weathered hands, and he carried that calm, the kind you only earn after learning how to wait out storms without panic. Every dawn, before anyone else stirred, he'd walk the deck alone, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the horizon. One morning I followed him. The sea was silver blue, the air sharp with salt and wind. I asked, "What are you listening for out there, Skipper?" "The waves sound the same every day." He smiled, that slow, knowing smile of his, and said, "I'm not listening to the waves, son. I'm listening to the sea." I must have looked puzzled because he chuckled softly, his voice low like the hum of the tide. "The waves just tell you what's happening on the surface," he said. "But the sea tells you what's coming." It took me years to understand what he meant, because truth be told, I wasn't listening to him either. I heard the words, but not the heart behind them. Most people think listening is simple, just sitting still while someone else talks. But real listening, the kind that changes relationships, that softens hearts, that's something deeper. Listening isn't waiting for your turn to speak. It's giving another soul enough silence to unfold. And when you learn to do that, to hear not just the words, but the weight behind them, you begin to see people differently. You stop reacting. You start understanding. Years later, when I began teaching and writing, I realized how few of us truly listen. We nod, we smile, we finish each other's sentences, but inside, we're already judging, fixing, comparing, preparing our next line. It's no wonder so many conversations end in distance. Most conflict doesn't begin with anger. It begins with not being heard. One evening, after a long seminar, a man came up to me. He looked exhausted, not from work, but from something heavier. He said, "Dale, I think my wife stopped talking to me long before she actually stopped talking." That sentence, it stayed with me. He wasn't grieving the words that were spoken. He was grieving the ones that had nowhere to land. And that's when I began to see listening as an act of courage, not politeness. Because to truly listen, you have to set aside your own storm long enough to notice someone else's sky. The skipper used to tell me stories of his younger days, how he'd once prided himself on barking orders, shouting commands before the crew could finish their sentences. "Back then," he said, "I thought authority was the same as control. But the sea taught me different. You don't control the ocean, you cooperate with it." He paused, eyes on the horizon, and added, "Same with people. You can't control them with words, but you can guide them with understanding." That line, it could have been written in a Carnegie book, though the old man had never read one. He lived it. You see, listening isn't just a social skill. It's a moral choice, a quiet form of respect. Every time you truly listen, you're telling another person, "You matter enough for me to pause my own story." That's not weakness. That's grace. And grace, when practiced long enough, changes every kind of conversation, from marriages to boardrooms to simple exchanges with strangers. I once asked the skipper what had changed him, how he went from a loud, impatient commander to this calm, listening man I came to admire. He chuckled, the kind of laugh that carries a trace of memory and regret, and said, "A mistake, almost big enough to drown me." He told me about a night decades earlier when a storm hit without warning. The wind roared, the waves rose like black mountains. Rain hammered the deck until it gleamed like glass. One of his crew shouted a warning, directions he ignored. "I thought I knew better," he said quietly. "I yelled back instead of listening." They struck a hidden reef. The ship survived, barely, but the man he'd ignored was thrown against the rail, his arm broken, his spirit shaken. The skipper carried that guilt for years. He told me, "That night I learned something I never forgot. Command without listening is just noise with a badge." He looked out at the sea and added softly, "The ocean doesn't reward shouting. It rewards awareness." That story changed me because I realized I'd been doing the same thing, not on a ship, but in life. I'd been too busy talking, teaching, advising, believing that sharing knowledge was the same as making connection. But people don't remember your wisdom as much as they remember your attention. It's not what you say that stays with them, it's how deeply you hear. From that day on, I started experimenting with a different kind of listening. The kind the skipper taught without ever meaning to. He called it listening to the sea, not the waves. I began calling it listening beyond words. And here's what I noticed. When you stop rushing to respond, something shifts in the air between you and another person. It's almost physical, like the sound in the room changes. The tension drops, the shoulders relax, the breathing slows. And suddenly, what they say next comes from a deeper place. That's the moment when real communication begins. But I'll tell you the truth, listening like that isn't natural. We've been trained our whole lives to defend, to fix, to perform, to prepare what we'll say next. Real listening feels uncomfortable at first because it's an act of surrender. You have to let go of control long enough to let someone else exist fully in front of you. There's a story I often share when I speak to leaders. A young manager named Rebecca once told me, "My team never opens up. Our meetings feel stiff, silent." I asked her, "How do you run them?" She said, "I talk. They listen." I smiled gently. What would happen if you reversed that? The next week, she tried something new. She asked one question, then stayed silent for 3 full breaths before saying another word. The first few seconds were awkward. Then people began to speak, slowly at first, then freely. By the end of that meeting, she said, "I heard more truth in 15 minutes than in the last 6 months." That's what happens when we stop filling silence and start honoring it. Because silence, when offered with care, isn't emptiness. It's space for truth to rise. So here's where it all comes together. I want to share with you 3 simple practices, 3 habits that can turn ordinary conversations into something real, something healing. They're not tricks, they're tools for compassion. They don't make you powerful over others, they make you powerful with them. The first one is called echo. Now, this isn't about repeating someone's words like a parrot. It's about reflecting their meaning, showing them gently that you've heard what's behind the words. When someone speaks to you, especially in conflict, resist the urge to explain or defend. Instead, echo what they said in your own calm, honest voice. Not as a trick, but as a way of saying, "I'm with you. I heard you." For example, If someone says, "You never listen to me," most of us would jump to defend. But instead, you can say, "You feel like I've been missing what matters to you." That's it. No but, no counterpoint, just the echo of understanding. Psychologists call it active listening, but I like to think of it as steady water. When someone's waves crash against you, your calm surface reflects their sky back to them. And often, that reflection is enough to calm the storm, because most people don't need to win. They just need to be heard. I've used this practice everywhere, in business meetings, family arguments, and even with strangers. It never fails to shift the energy. When someone feels mirrored instead of measured, they stop fighting for space. And once they stop fighting, real dialogue begins. That's the gentle power of listening beyond words. You turn down your own volume so others can find their voice. And strangely enough, that's when your own voice earns the most respect. Before we move to the next practice, I want to tell you one more story, one that still echoes in my mind. It happened during the skipper's final year at sea. A sudden squall came out of nowhere. The sky blackened, wind howling, sails ripping like paper. The deck was chaos, men shouting, ropes snapping, waves pounding over the rail. And through it all, the skipper's voice cut through, calm, steady. "Listen!" he shouted, not to the men, but to the sea. They thought he'd lost his mind, but he closed his eyes, tilted his head, and waited. Then he pointed north and said, "The waves are breaking wrong. There's shelter behind that ridge." They followed his lead. Minutes later, they reached calmer water. When I asked him afterward how he knew, he said quietly, "The waves lied. The sea didn't." That's how listening feels too. Words are the waves, loud, restless, sometimes misleading. But the sea, the tone, the silence, the feeling beneath the words, that's where the truth lives. If you want to reach calm waters with people, you have to learn to hear beneath what they say. After that storm, the skipper changed. He became softer, but not weaker, quieter, but far more commanding. He didn't speak as much, yet when he did, everyone listened. Not because they feared him, but because they trusted the space he gave them. That's the paradox of true listening. The less noise you make, the more meaning you create. I once asked him how he stayed so calm when everyone around him shouted. He said, "You can't hear the sea when your own waves are louder." And that is the heart of the next practice. The second practice, my friend, is called 3 breaths. If you want to become the kind of listener people trust, start here. The rule is simple. When someone finishes speaking, take 3 slow, quiet breaths before you respond. That's it. Just 3. It sounds small, but those 3 breaths can change the entire rhythm of a conversation. You see, most of us react instead of responding. We rush to fill the silence. We defend. We correct. We prepare our next line before the other person has even finished theirs. But when you breathe, when you give those few seconds of air, something shifts. The space between you softens. Your heartbeat slows. Your ego loosens its grip. And the person in front of you can feel it. They sense your presence. They sense your calm. They sense, maybe for the first time, that they're safe enough to be honest. The skipper never counted breaths, but he practiced the same thing every day. If a sailor came to him angry, he'd listen quietly, eyes steady, hands resting on the rail. He wouldn't answer right away. He waited, not just for the words to end, but for the emotion to settle. Only then would he speak. And somehow, his few quiet words always carried more weight than a dozen shouted ones. I began practicing the same thing myself, not on a ship, but in everyday life. When someone criticized my work, when a student challenged my ideas, when a friend spoke in anger, I felt that familiar urge rise in me, that quick need to explain, to fix, to win. But instead, I started counting. 1, 2, 3. And by the time I exhaled, my need to win had faded, and my desire to understand had grown. Those 3 breaths became a bridge between reaction and response, a small space where wisdom could slip in. You see, we live in a world that rewards quickness, fast answers, instant opinions. But the best listeners aren't the fastest. They're the ones brave enough to wait. Because silence, when handled kindly, isn't awkward, it's generous. When you offer that pause, you're really saying, I believe what you're telling me deserves a moment of air before it disappears. I once coached a man named Victor, an executive known for his temper. He told me, I interrupt because I already know what they're going to say. And I said, then you're not leading, Victor. You're predicting. We worked on the 3 breaths rule for a month. At first, it drove him crazy. He said, Dale, I feel like I'm losing control. And I told him, that's because you're finally sharing it. But by the end of that month, something remarkable happened. His team started talking more. Meetings that used to drag for hours now ended in laughter. He said, I stopped barking orders, and people started volunteering ideas. Listening had turned command into collaboration. If you try this yourself, you'll feel it too. The first breath cools your emotions. The second clears your mind. The third opens your heart. And whatever you say after that will always sound more human, because it will be. The skipper used to say, when you stop fighting the noise, you can hear the direction of the wind. He wasn't talking about sailing. He was talking about people, because listening isn't submission. It's navigation. It's how you find the current underneath the waves, the current that carries truth. And now, the third practice, my favorite of them all. It's simple, but it has the power to transform every conversation you'll ever have. I call it the open palm. Have you ever noticed what your hands do when you're listening? Most of the time we cross our arms, we point, we fidget. We close ourselves off, sending a message we don't even mean to send. But when you rest your hands gently, palms open, you send a different signal. It says, I'm not here to control this. I'm here to receive. That posture, that quiet openness, can do something words alone never could. Now pair that with one small question. Can you tell me more about that? It's such a simple line, but it's pure gold, because it opens the door to what's underneath. It says, I'm not done hearing you yet. I remember using it once with a friend who had grown distant. I asked, are you upset with me? He shrugged, said, no, I'm just busy. Normally, I would have left it there, but something told me to stay. So I opened my hand and my heart a little wider. I asked, can you tell me more about that? He hesitated, then sighed. Honestly, he said, I've felt invisible lately, like nothing I do really matters. That moment changed our friendship, not because I solved his problem, but because I gave him space to be real. That's the open palm, not solving, not pushing, just holding space until truth feels safe enough to speak. The skipper lived by that same principle, long before I ever had words for it. He'd listen to the crew's worries without rushing to fix them. No quick advice, no judgment, just presence. Once, a sailor came to him, said he was planning to leave the sea. He was tired, not of the work, but of the fear. He said, "I can't go through another storm." The skipper nodded slowly. He didn't argue, didn't try to convince him. He simply asked, "Tell me, what is the sea saying to you now?" The man blinked, then began to talk about the sleepless nights, the weight of responsibility, the way the ocean sometimes felt like it was testing him personally. He talked for nearly an hour. By the end, his voice softened. He said, "I think I just needed someone to hear my fear without calling it weakness." And the skipper smiled. That sailor stayed, and he became one of the finest men on the crew. That's the open palm, not fixing, not forcing, just holding space until courage grows back on its own. Listening like that is not passive. It's one of the most active forms of love there is. It requires presence, it requires humility, and it requires courage. The courage to stop steering every conversation and let it find its own current. Because when you listen deeply, something beautiful happens. People begin to hear themselves more clearly too. The skipper used to say, "Every man hears the wind differently, but the direction is the same." And I think he was right. Beneath all our noise, our pride, our armor, we're all trying to say the same few things. See me, hear me, understand me. And when we meet each other there, in that quiet honesty, the world softens. A few years after he retired, I went to visit the skipper one last time. He was living in a small cottage near the shore, a quiet place where the gulls cried overhead and the waves brushed the rocks like an old lullaby. When I found him, he was sitting by the window, a cup of tea in his hand, his gaze fixed on the horizon, just as it had always been. I asked him if he missed the sea. He smiled that same slow smile and said, "No, I still listen to her every day." He reached over, picked up a seashell from the table, and held it to his ear. "She still talks," he said softly. "Just quieter now." Then he handed me the shell and added, "Most people stop listening when the waves are gone. But that's when the real music starts." I held that shell to my ear, and though all I heard was a faint hum, I understood. It wasn't about sound, it was about attention. Because when you really listen to the sea, to a friend, to life itself, you start to hear what's always been there, the steady pulse beneath the noise, the heartbeat of connection. I carried that shell home with me. Sometimes, before I write or speak, I hold it up to my ear again. And in that quiet hum, I remember the skipper's words. I slow down. I breathe. And I listen for what's not being said. Because every person I meet is an ocean in disguise. And every conversation is a chance to hear the tide beneath their words. Now, before we part, I want to leave you with a few small steps, simple ways to bring this kind of listening into your own life. They don't require talent, just attention. Step 1. Echo once a day. The next time someone speaks from emotion, mirror their message calmly. Show them you understand before you explain anything. It's not about repeating, it's about resonating. Step 2. 3 breaths. Choose one conversation each day where you take 3 quiet breaths before responding. Notice what happens. Notice how the air changes, how your heartbeat slows, how the other person starts to breathe easier too. Step 3. Open palm. When someone seems closed, ask, "Can you tell me more about that?" Then, stay quiet long enough to receive what they offer. If you do these 3 things just once a day each, you'll begin to feel something remarkable. People will open around you like harbors after a long storm, not because you've said something brilliant, but because you've made them feel safe to speak. And the more you listen, the more you'll see how similar we all are beneath our noise. Listening, my friend, isn't a soft skill. It's a soft strength. It builds bridges no argument ever could. It heals wounds that words alone can't reach. Every person you meet carries an ocean of feelings, most of them unspoken. When you learn to hear those tides, you stop living on islands. One evening, I went back to that same harbor in Maine. The lighthouse still stood, weathered but shining. The wind was fierce, the water restless. But if you closed your eyes, beneath the waves you could hear something steady, the heartbeat of the sea itself. That's what true listening sounds like. Not the noise, but the rhythm beneath it. So tonight I invite you to try. Not to fix, not to advise, just to listen. With your breath, your presence, your open palm. Because someone near you, a friend, a child, a partner, maybe even a stranger, is waiting to be heard beyond their words. And when you give them that gift, you'll discover something even deeper. The quiet satisfaction of being the kind of person who brings peace simply by paying attention. Tomorrow, when the world gets loud again, remember the skipper's wisdom. Don't just listen to the waves, listen to the sea, because that's where the truth lives. Beneath the noise, waiting for someone patient enough to hear. You know, the older I get, the more I realize the world doesn't need louder voices. It needs calmer ones. Voices that don't rush to fill the silence, but protect it. Voices that don't argue for attention, but offer understanding. Listening, in its purest form, isn't about words at all. It's about presence. It's the sound of love without the noise of self. So tonight, when you lay your head down, maybe listen for a moment to the soft hum of life around you, to the quiet rhythm that's been there all along. Because somewhere in that stillness, beneath the surface of every day, the sea is still speaking. And if you listen closely enough, you just might hear her calling your name.